All right, I figured I'd make this video real quick for my friend Pete. He's having trouble with his Baja, the money pit. CT was watching this video and told me to check it out. So I thought I'd make a video for him and show you what I know about flywheels and some of the problems that you might be having and how to address it. So the quickest problem, or the quickest way to address your issue, since you already have a flywheel that fits the back of your crank, what you want to do is probably take that down to a machine shop, order just a starter ring here. You can order this if you go online and just type in the starter ring. If you heat this up, the starter ring will come off and a new one can be put on pretty easy. And that would be the fastest way to fix your issue, because you have a flywheel that already fits your motor. And there's a couple different patterns. You have a SPG pattern, which is the most popular pattern, and there's some that are just 8 dowel, and the dowel pins are in no particular order. They used to sell a jig where you could take a 4 dowel crank and turn it into an 8 dowel crank. And then the other issue you can run into is there's an 8 millimeter dowel pin, and then there's also an 1132 dowel pin, which is a little larger. So if you mess the 8 millimeter pin up, you can repair it with the larger pin. So first thing you got to do is figure out if you have an 8 millimeter pin or the 1132 pin, and then you can figure out what pattern you have. If you don't have the SPG pattern and you want to use a new flywheel, you can usually just take 1 dowel pin out and leave 7 dowel pins in the back of the crank, and the flywheel generally fits. We don't usually have to drill the holes here unless we're putting the larger pin in, or if you're going from the 8 millimeter to the 1132. So I think probably what you have is a pattern issue, because when you turn your flywheel over, you could see how one of the holes, the pin was offset, and that's usually the pin you have to pull out, because you don't want to oblong that hole. If these holes don't fit the pins really nice, the flywheel will just come off the back of the motor, especially if the motor has any kind of power at all. The flywheel will come loose. So this is a brand new MP crank. This is a Forge 4340 78 millimeter, and I bought the crank and the flywheel together. And we don't generally have to mess with the dowel pins. Let me turn this crank over for you. Sitting on the bench there. And you can see I popped this flywheel on, and it fits perfect. That's an SPG pattern, and it's an 8 millimeter pin. So this is generally what you deal with. The more high-end cranks, some of them come with a larger pin, so that might be what you're running into. So, but the flywheel that you have sort of throws me off, being that it's the lower quality. These are the cast flywheels, and this is the old, not the old cut, but there used to be 2 style flywheels. We'll just reference this style to a Berg flywheel. The Berg flywheels used to be really nice. They had a nice contour around the corner here, and they leave a little more meat where the clutch bolts go, so you don't have the failure here. And you can see how these are more just chopped off right here, and the hole's very thin where the clutch bolts down. So these tend to be a little weaker, and the material itself is not as good, being this is cast and this is forged. The forged one's definitely the better one that they had you drill out. I wish they wouldn't have done that. So the only option you got now is to repair your flywheel, or get the 1132 dowel pins. Take all the dowel pins out of the back of your crank if they're not already 1132, and then you put one in at a time and drill each hole. And it's very hard to keep a drill on plane and not waller the hole out. I don't know if waller is a word, but oblong the hole. That has to be pretty precise. So it's usually done in a drill press or a mill for the best results. So here's the part number on that MP flywheel. So I don't know if you talked about buying an MP flywheel offline. I think the easiest way to fix it is buy the starter ring, and then you have a flywheel already that fits your crank. And then when you rebuild your motor, you can either buy a crank and flywheel mated together, or you can send your crankshaft out to like Remco and have a flywheel made for your crankshaft if the crank is worthy. You know, you might pull that thing apart and have a Berg crank in there worth $5,000. I don't know. You just have to wait and see until you split the case. The other question was the welding on the back of the case. So back in the old days, you know, when they used to hot rod the cases, some of the guys used to weld the back of the case up here behind number 3. And this is a modification. You know, they would bore the cylinder out. Of course, when you bore this cylinder out, you get closer and closer to going through the back of the case. So a lot of guys will weld this and give it some rigidity back there and beef it up. Here's an Autocraft case for back in the day. It's the same way, you know, welded behind number 3, and they even went as far as to put the gussets around the cylinders. The newer aluminum cases, you'll see here if you zoom in, the back of that case is solid, and it comes that way from the factory. This case has been, you know, deburred, modified, fitted, and worked on a lot. So this isn't what they look like when you buy it. It'll just be raw, and you have to finish it. But yeah, the benefit to having the case with the gusset made into it like this is you don't have any distortion of the main web. You can see that weld is right up against the rear main. So when you take a welder and you weld all the way across here and you weld down here, what happens is this hole becomes not round anymore, and you end up having to bore a brand new case. So that's why you'll always see, usually on the oil cooler surface here on the pad, you'll see a 20 or a 50 cut or a 40 cut on a case if it's been welded. The reason I don't like doing that is because when you weld the back of number 3 and then you line bore the case, if it's going to distort the bore for the crankshaft, it more than likely is going to distort the camshaft bore, and you can't make that straight again. You know, you can buy an oversized bearing and make the crankshaft turn, but you usually get a tight spot in the camshaft operation, and that's why these aluminum cases are so nice. So here's a stock case that hasn't been welded, and you can see where that cylinder would be right there. And of course, if you make it bigger, you know, obviously this is going to be thinner back here. So that's why they weld that up. It's no, hadn't been damaged. It's just it's a mod that they used to do to try to make the case a little bit stronger. And so yeah, that's just that's how it is. Most unfortunate that you're having the parts problems that you're having. You know, I know people have issues ordering parts all the time. This Volkswagen hobby is pretty hard. Just the hardest part is getting the parts and finding something that's a quality part. I've all but quit working on Volkswagens. I don't work on them anymore. I mean, I do my personal stuff now and a few friends, but I won't do it anymore because I can't get parts and I can't get machine work. So that's the issue. Can't get anybody to cut cylinder heads, can't get anybody to cut a case, and you can't get parts, can't get camshafts, can't get lifters. There's just it's a serious problem, and I don't think it's going to get any better, and I wouldn't take it personal. It's just it's how the hobby's becoming. So the only thing you can do is you know, go out there to the West Coast and hit a swap meet. So Texas, they have some good swap meets there, and find some old school parts and refurbish them. And you know, that's probably going to be your best way to go if you want something quality that's going to hold up. This is a Volkswagen crank that somebody's welded counterweights on, and it'll get repaired. That has a dowel pin issue. The flywheel came loose. It was a 7 dowel, and the flywheel came loose on it, and now it needs the bigger dowel pins installed. So I hope that helps. That answers a couple questions, and happy VWing.